Good evening, everybody. Tonight is March 21st. It is a workshop meeting to go over the budget. And will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes. Trustee Davis?
Here.
Trustee Blankenship?
Here.
Trustee Bolfus?
Here.
Trustee Paglia?
Here.
Trustee Case?
Here.
Trustee Bullwinkle? Here. President Cullerton?
Here. And if we could all please rise for the pledge. Venus, would you lead us in the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. This is our, I believe, fourth budget meeting, fourth budget meeting. Probably more than we've ever done, at least in my tenure here. And one that's actually been where all of the meetings are televised, and we've asked for a lot of response, and staff has done a tremendous job. So I'm going to hand it over to Phil and Venus.
I'll just introduce it.
There we go.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have the capital budgets, the capital improvement plan, and then an update on the corporate fund to review this evening. We'll start out with the capital budgets, and Venus has a presentation. You have the updated detail of all the capital budgets in your packet, starting with the debt service fund and moving on through the stormwater buyout fund, and Vitas will hit the highlights of those, and certainly we'll try to answer any questions you have as we go through it.
Thank you. As with previous budget meetings, we'll hit the highlights first, and then we can go through the budgets in detail page by page as necessary. Starting with the debt service fund. The purpose of the debt service fund, as the name implies, is to accumulate funds for paying off all past bond issues. Currently, there's three revenue sources for the debt service fund. There is the property tax component of it, which is a levy based on prior authorization. Will you be able to reach me? Sorry about that.
No problem.
Ocean
No worries.
right? Okay. Are we good here? Okay. So that's could be prior tax levies from prior bond issues, prior referendums. So that's the one component. TIP 3 is also a revenue source for some of the current bond issues, as is a prior bond issue through the Sugar Creek Golf Course. More recently, we did issue new bonds about a month ago. With those bonds, we did fully retire some 2003 bonds and partially retired some 2008 bonds. Here's the three separate bond issues or components of the recent bond issue from last month. One component was used to refund the other bonds that I mentioned on the previous slide. The second component was used to restore negative fund balances in some of the capital projects fund, which we've discussed on previous occasions also. And then the leftovers, which is the third one, was approximately $500,000 to use for future capital improvements. And that's the third component, the 2001C. Any questions on bonds and retirement? Okay, moving on to the capital projects, starting with the Street Improvement Fund, or Fund 60. This fund was created after a referendum for a 0.5% sales tax. All the proceeds of that sales tax go exclusively to this fund for street repair. Currently, it's about $1.38 million annually that we derive from this fund. Any state and federal grant monies that we get also are shown in this fund as revenue. And this year we also have a project that has some components of TIF money from Ovaltine, being the South Villa projects, and there's also some motor fuel tax money that are being transferred to defer some of the expenses in this fund. Here's the four primary projects that are being funded in Fund 60 this year. South Villa Reconstruction Project, I'll show you a slide later, but this one had 9 different funding sources, probably the most complex from a funding standpoint. Ardmore Bridge, which is currently nearly completion of Phase 2 design. That's federally funded. A project that we started last fall by doing the Iowa Street component of it, Plymouth and Vermont, intermittent concrete patching. That work will be starting within the next few weeks. That is state funding, and we do have the funding in the bank for that. We actually received a check forwarding us 85% of that, so we do have that in the bank. Harvard, Washington is another project funded through the capital bill. That funding is not fully secured. We have an agreement in place, but we don't have the funding in the bank. Now, there was some recent litigation related to the liquor tax at the state level, so this project may be affected by that litigation, so that may delay the start of that project. But we're trying to get an answer one way or another from the state on that one. Any questions on those? Here's a little cash flow diagram for the Street Improvement Fund. As you can see, this coming year, we have almost $9 million in expenses, $7.5 million in revenue, so we are drawing down the fund balance, which we've been building up specifically for those two projects, being South Villa and the Ardmore Bridge. Right now on paper, we're projecting a slight deficit, but this deficit will only occur if both projects are completed and invoiced by the end of the fiscal year. Now, we're optimistic they'll be completed, but I don't think they'll be invoiced to us because the state usually does not invoice very quickly. Either way, we make over $100,000 in revenue a month in this fund, so, I mean, this will be covered by the end of May of the following fiscal year. So, you know, in all essence, it's a balanced budget. Moving on to the Capital Projects Fund. This particular fund does not have a dedicated revenue source. We have one project currently proposed in this fund, and that will receive funding either through a CMAQ grant or through motor fuel taxes. And between those two, they will cover 100% of the project cost. And that project being the Roosevelt Road Sidewalk project. In the past, we have also budgeted a sidewalk program, but that is not proposed for the current year because of the lack of dedicated funding. Here's the cash flow for the Capital Projects Fund. As you can see, we're temporarily have a negative fund balance. That's primarily due to the time lag between when we incur the expenses and when we get the reimbursement from the grants. There's, as a coincidence, there's about $83,000 in expected land acquisition costs. We have to front those, and then we get 80% of our money back. So, and that's another reason why we haven't really budgeted anything else beside that project, because we're not going to get all of our funds back until somewhat after the project. So we're going to be fronting it, so we could run into cash flow problems. Next year, once we collect everything, as you can see, we're showing an $81,000 fund balance. So it's just a question of collecting our reimbursements. Any questions on Capital Projects Fund? Okay. Moving on to the Equipment Replacement Fund. Again, this fund does not have a dedicated source of revenue. All the net proceeds from the 2011 bond issue were placed in this fund. And I'll show you in the cash flow diagram how much that is. Otherwise, revenue that goes in here could be from sale of vehicles. In the past, we used to have general fund transfers, but I don't think we've had one of those for well over 5 years. But in the past, it has been a source of revenue for equipment replacement. Not this year. As far as expenses, we have two lease purchases that are carrying over, an ambulance and the Vector. Hopefully you would have received a report on the use of the Vector in your packets explaining how it's utilized and what the cost of the alternative would be. So if you have any further questions on that, we do have Dan Sullivan here, or we can get back to you with some answers, hopefully. We're not showing the new vehicle purchases yet. We did, like I said, we did transfer the bond proceeds in there, but our plan is to wait and to approach the board on an individual basis for any vehicles that we feel are warranted for replacement. get the approval first, and then we'll authorize the funds for those projects. So right now, everything is still zeroed out other than the 2 leases. Also, originally, we had proposed a $70,000 transfer from the general fund to fund the small capitals. We've reduced that down to $40,000 because of the additional expense we expect for the fuel price increases. So we still have $40,000 in there for small capitals, down from $70,000. And here's the projected cash flow for the equipment replacement fund. Here you can see the revenue coming in from the net proceeds of the bond issue. There's the $40,000 remaining transfer. After we pay off our leases, there's about $350,000 left for future purposes, and that money is basically sitting there until authorized by the village board. Any questions on that? Landon.
Just real quick. With the ambulance lease, the fees that we talked about, the fee increase that we pushed through last year, I believe it was, helps pay for that lease. So
Not directly.
In a sense, we have a funding source, in a sense, for that.
The funding, all the funds from the ambulance fees go into the general fund, so everything passes through the general fund. So if we were to dedicate that revenue for the ambulance, then that would have that much less money going into the general fund.
Right, but the purpose was to help pay down that ambulance lease.
That may have been the purpose, but there never was a transfer of money from the general fund to the vehicle fund because of the large deficits in the general fund. So, I mean, we can designate so much of the general fund money for this purpose, but then that would decrease the balance in the general fund. But certainly we can do that.
Okay.
Any other questions? The Land and Buildings Fund, there really is no activity proposed in this fund, but I will note that that was one of the funds that had a negative fund balance, and that has now been restored with the proceeds of the bond issue. So that'll be at or near zero with no further activity proposed for this year. Building Improvement Fund, pretty much the same thing. No dedicated source of revenue, but we did bring in some bond issue money to eliminate the negative deficit. And we also had a list of priority improvements, about $95,000, that we did request permission to go forward with those. And here they are, the roof of the Public Works Building, the repairs to the pools, the History Museum, and the fire station driveway. So that money is in the proposed budget in the Building Improvement Fund for next year. Any questions on that? Stormwater Buyout Fund. This one has a dedicated source, but that dedicated source is not reliable. Pretty much it's dependent on private development activity. So if we get private development that pays stormwater detention fees or stormwater fees, then we generate revenue. If there's little or no development, we get almost no revenue. Also a little bit of grant funding in there. And we also have the 50-50 drainage program, so there is some private monies that come in here. But most of the resident participation in the last few years has been in kind rather than hard dollars. And we've tried to be flexible that way, but we're not building projects with dollars. We're providing labor and materials or whatever it takes to get the projects done. Expenses, again, any outside permit review for stormwater is charged to this fund. All our drainage projects appear here, our 50-50 program. We do have a grant application pending for 3 drainage projects. This would be federal money resulting from the previous floods. Those would be 75% federal, 25% local match. Monterey bioretention. We did pick up some county money on that a year ago, and we've expanded the project and submitted it to the state under the Illinois Green Infrastructure Program, so that grant is also pending. And then the 2 property buyouts which were on the agenda last week, we're going ahead and processing the the federal grant for the 75%, and then we're going to submit the grant for the 25% to the state through the Hurricane Ike DCEO fund. And if we don't get the 25%, then we can either withdraw or we can go back and renegotiate the 75% so that there's no out-of-pocket to the village. So one way or another, I think that's going to go forward, hopefully. Any questions on that? Okay, as far as cash flow in the stormwater fund coming in, we did have a negative balance. That was because of some grant monies that was due, and actually that check came in soon after the beginning of the fiscal year start. So we actually started the year at zero. We're going to end up this year with a slight positive balance. Next year, if all the grants are received, you can see we have about $700,000 in activity, and we'll be pretty close to zero by the end of next year, assuming all the projects move forward and are completed on time. And again, if we get more development activity, we could get more revenue for projects in this fund. And we will continue to pursue other grants, of course, also, as they become available.
And Vetus, a lot of these FY 11, 12s you're showing us are, if everything goes exactly as planned.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. If there's a little bit delay, then we won't get the bills for some of these until the following fiscal year, and then.
So there could always be a back and forth on some of these.
Oh yes. Okay. Oh yes. With projects, it's very difficult to predict the timing. So
Right.
when you're putting money in one fiscal year versus another, it's really a best guess at that point. Because, 1 month delay usually doesn't mean anything, but if the month happens to be April, it carries over to the next fiscal year.
Right. Okay.
All right, moving on to the capital improvement program. The purpose of the capital improvement program is basically to provide a 5-year planning horizon for some of our larger projects and our larger pieces of equipment. We only put projects or equipment in the CIP, as it's called, if it's greater than $20,000 in cost and has a useful life of 15 years or more. So your smaller resurfacing projects, your smaller trucks will not appear in here. It's only the bigger ticket items. And the current year of the CIP is what ends up in the current year budget for programming purposes. As you go through the CIP, one thing we added this year to help identify the changes is we put the word new on any new project in the CIP. So if it doesn't have the word new on it, that means there may be some cost changes, but it's a project that was already in the CIP prior. So a lot of the new projects are the grant projects that are not totally funded yet, but for planning purposes and actually for the grant application, they like to see that it's a project that we've been planning all along and not just making up for the grant application. So it does serve a purpose to put it in the CIP.
Gotcha.
I mentioned earlier that South Villa is probably one of the most complex projects that we've had from a funding standpoint. Well, here's a breakdown of the South Villa project and the 9 funding sources. I thought this was a good example to use, even though it's an extreme example of how you assemble a funding package for some of your larger projects. And that's really all the prepared remarks I have. If there's any general questions, otherwise we'll move on to the next part of the presentation.
Any questions? All right. Let's hit the next section.
Okay, the corporate fund updates. If you could bring that slide up. So it's in your packet also. The last we presented the corporate fund was on February 21st, and at that time we had a projected income, revenues over expenses of $84,000, a modest projection. Under this update, that's you can see that at the top. We had revenues of $17,921,000. Expenses proposed at $17,837,000, and And there have been a number of changes, some of significance, which I'll cover tonight and walk through, that have taken place since that presentation a month ago. But the bottom line is that we still have a projected income of $69,150. And expenses originally were proposed at a reduction of 2% from the previous year's actual, and we're now showing that at 1.7%, primarily because of the increase in the gasoline expense. But that's the kind of the overview, and let me walk through the particulars. The first section you see up there is on the revenue changes, and some of the more significant ones had to do with our updated census. As you know, we've lost some population in the census, which will affect some of our per capita taxes, the state income tax and the state use tax, which will state income tax dropping by $49,000, state use tax by $7,500. A couple small thing with fire reinspection fees, $500. The insurance settlement, which we really recently discussed with our the class action settlement with our insurance broker, will be a plus $14,650. Fire ambulance fees under the proposed increase for non-residents, that would be we're projecting an increase of $21,000. Building permit fees was discussed at our last meeting. This is still proposed at this point, but we feel there is certainly a basis for implementing this increase to recover our actual costs of inspection, and that would be $15,000. And the last one is an interesting one, and this has to do with the cable television public education, or what we call PEG fees. The village did pass an ordinance in 2007 that was in fact implemented for AT&T, but for whatever reason it was not implemented through Comcast, which is the major, has the major number of customers. AT&T is a relatively small player compared to Comcast within Villa Park, but this is still being finalized. I know Vitas and Shannon are pursuing this with Comcast. Conservative estimate is that this might generate as much as $40,000 in public education fees, which would allow us to replace equipment and do a number of things if in fact those revenues were to hold. Presently we do have expenses in our public affairs budget for the televising the village board meetings, for some of our other services related to that. We also have a cable commission budget, which amounts to about $28,000, but there has been a proposal from the Cable Commission regarding additional equipment replacement, and some of which is certainly needed, and this would provide us the opportunity, but we do need to firm this up in that process before we can make some commitments. So this would be certainly subject to further review with regard to some of the Cable Commission proposals, if in fact this revenue is confirmed and we can anticipate it at those levels. Now, typically this I believe should be a separate billing item on your cable television bill. That's how it was initially structured, and as I say, we're still trying to unravel it as to why it was not implemented at the time the ordinance was passed or shortly thereafter, and we'll have to report further to the board on this, but we did want to get this up there for some explanation this evening, with further review and explanation to come. So those are the highlights of the changes in the revenue overall. That's about an increase of $34,650 when you include the cable TV public education fee estimate. And moving on to the expenses, we did have an adjustment for legal services. We have been negotiating these down in a number of instances, but we had not fully recognized the actual in certain areas from the prior year, so we need to adjust that by $9,000. That's still about $7,000 less than the previous year's budget in that area. Public affairs contractual, we saw some dormant programs that really weren't active any longer, and we dropped budgets in those areas, $3,600. Public affairs cable commission, this was an adjustment to bring that budget back up to $4,000, increase of $2,000 to recognize some equipment, but again, that can certainly be subject to further review with the cable TV PEG fees. And then the adjustments for the manager's salary with the new manager contract, $10,000 on salary, $7,800 having to do with the car allowance and moving expenses. Police contractual, next item, $9,500 reduction. The chief was and his staff were successful in negotiating contracts down in the amount of $9,500, and the our contractual services account. That's 5 separate contracts. We are proposing an increase for the fire administration inspector. This is the fire inspector for multifamily buildings and businesses. That was 24 hours per week. Going back 2 years with the budget reductions, it was reduced to 16 hours. And what we're doing is proposing to come back sort of in the middle at 20 hours a week to enhance the capability with the fire inspection and the multifamily section. And there was information in your packet that Director Dusky had presented, which further explains that. We also made some adjustments to fire training and conferences to offset some of that cost at $2,000. Then the big one, the gasoline expense. Vitas has done a lot of research with his department on what to expect, and it's coming back that the impact that they're likely to see on the wholesale level would be about 75 cents per gallon. At 80,000 gallons a year is what we used last year. It would amount to a $60,000 increase in our gasoline expense. Now this, with our fuel conservation program, to the extent we're successful, we can hopefully reduce that somewhat in the coming year. That's not figured in here. This is just the factor of the increase at 75 cents per gallon based on last year's usage. Relatively minor adjustment in IMF expense of $2,400 based on final salary calculations, and then, as Vitas mentioned earlier, in the equipment replacement fund, we originally proposed to transfer $70,000. We're going to reduce that by $30,000 to a $40,000 transfer on the basis to offset some of the, particularly the gasoline expense here on the expense side of the ledger. So net effect about a $49,500 overall increase, and so you start with your $84,000 previous income at $221,11. You add back the $34,000 in net revenue adjustments, and then reduce it by the $49,500 in expense charges, and so you come to an adjusted income of $69,150. So that's the summary of changes since we last visited this at February 21st. Still a positive balance, but certainly some things to be concerned about. Some further, as I say, some further evaluation regarding the cable television public education fees. So that's the summary. Certainly open it up to any questions you would have.
On the right? Anyone? On the left?
No.
All right. Next one.
Well, that's
it.
Those are the highlights. And unless there's any specifics on the capital budgets or at all that anyone wanted to bring up, I know we just walked through the highlights. So there's the detail in your packets, and previously received the whole packet back in February. And we just showed you some of the updates and adjustments there. But certainly, if there's any additional questions on the capital budgets, I think certainly. Again, a really terrific effort by Public Works to really seek out grant funding wherever they can to make things happen in the village, and that's really a very strong component of your Public Works department.
Actually, I just have one, and it has to go back to one of the expenses, and I probably will speak to Greg on this. Where is that pool maintenance? Where are we at? The mandated. Yeah.
We were supposed to have a staff meeting this morning, but things got changed around a little bit. So I'll let you know tomorrow when we have a staff meeting. We can talk tomorrow about it.
Okay.
We have to get it done before we open.
Right.
So I would imagine within the next month we'll be ready to go.
And I figure if we're paying for it, we might as well get it done quickly, right? All right. That was the main thing I had, and then. The Comcast cable, the PEG fees, we should have an update next couple of weeks as far as that goes.
We actually have a letter going out to Comcast tomorrow.
Okay, so, but I mean, their reply we should get in a couple of weeks, correct? Okay.
The big issue focuses on whether they owe us any back
Prorated.
for the past.
I talked with Manager Page about that earlier. It may be beneficial to find some old Comcast cable bills in town. All right, Any other questions or comments?
Mr. President,
Trustee Boltus?
on the small drainage projects, I believe that's at the backyard drainage flooding problem issues.
Yes, that is three of the most severe flooding locations from the September 2008 and from the July 2010 storms. One is an area in the I believe it's the 600 block of South Michigan. The other one is in the vicinity of Villa in Washington. And I'm trying to remember where the third one is now. I have to get back to you on the third
That's
one.
okay. So, all right, so that's it. And then you also have the drainage assistance program. Now that program is,
That's an ongoing program. There's a scoring component. Engineering evaluates the drainage, and they either provide technical guidance, or if it's severe enough, they'll rank it and put it on a waiting list, and then we just go in order on a 50-50 basis.
and then you're budgeting, what, 20,000 for that?
20,000 is what we've been budgeting a year since the program's inception, and it's been going on, thinking about 15 years now.
So somebody, for people who are listening, if somebody has a drainage issue in their backyard or somewhere, they come to your department and ask for assistance in that, right? Is that how?
They make initial contact. We'll go out and make an initial evaluation. We'll give them our opinion as to whether we think it would qualify for the program. If it does seem to qualify and they want to pursue it, we ask them to place a $250 deposit, and then it's given a location on the waiting list. There is a waiting list.
How long's the list, the waiting list?
More than a year.
Okay, so it's more than $20,000.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We burn through that every
Yeah, I
year,
know we
I
do.
believe.
I know we
Yeah,
do.
right?
Absolutely.
Now, would you just help them with telling them how the system has to go, which way they should run it, and let them do the whole thing themselves?
Oh, absolutely. Technical assistance includes giving them some pointers on some simple fixes or which way to install a drain, or even a simple design.
Yeah, because some people are kind of wondering, if they don't want to wait 2 or 3 years, if they want to just get it done, pay for it themselves, but need some assistance from the village.
That happens quite often, actually, and then we'll provide all the engineering assistance to get them through the project.
And then there's no waiting period for that to be done?
The only waiting period is as time allows.
Okay,
So
it's
you know,
not
as soon as we can get
it's
to
not
it
2
and help
years
them
down the
out, we
line to
will.
get that, so-
No. Typically, anybody that wants to move forward with their own funding, we find a way to get it done.
Thanks.
Go right ahead.
Well, we've as the President mentioned at the beginning, this is our fourth budget meeting. We have covered now all the budgets through the various funds of the village, and we feel that we're prepared to move this forward to a public hearing. And if the board is in agreement with that, we will advance it to public hearing for April 11th. Would be we'd have to advertise for that and put the budget on file 7 to 14 days in advance, and we will certainly do that. Certainly, you'll be notified once it is and receive the final copy with everything pulled together. So, if the board is comfortable with advancing to public hearing, we would like to do that at this point.
We can't really take a vote on it, but I would say I'm confident, and I appreciate the fact we lost our finance director midstream, and Vitas and Shannon did an absolutely tremendous job. All the department heads looking for ways to cut. I recall this initial conversation in November going, well, we got to find $1 million. And now we're at about a $60,000 surplus. Unlike towns right next to us, Oak Brook Terrace, that has 4,500 people at night population and a daytime population of about 100,000. Villa Park isn't that lucky, so I thank all the staff and everyone else for getting that accomplished. And I would like to see it on the move to a public hearing and get this accomplished. And it's definitely something that the new manager can walk in and see a balanced budget and a lot of cuts made by by each department and willing to make sacrifices. So, any other questions, comments?
Yeah,
Trustee
it
Bolfus?
was obvious it was a team effort, and I know most of you just got thrown into it. You didn't see it coming, but thank you for stepping up to the plate. Interim Manager Page and Vetus and Shannon and the department heads, I really appreciate it. You've really done a fantastic job in a stressful situation, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I remember the third one. It's Monterey and Highland.
There we go. And if he didn't tell us now, he would have called everybody in town at 2 a.m. to say, I got it, here it is. Any other questions from anybody on the board? Is everybody good with putting it to the meeting in April?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we'll put it to the meeting in April. We have item 4, consider executive session, RE5 ILCS 120/2 C11 litigation, and I would also like to add personnel. Can I have a motion?
Mr. President,
Trustee Blanketsop.
make a motion.
Can I have a second?
Mr. President?
Trustee Taglia.
Second.
Questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Trustee Blankenship.
Yes.
Trustee Bolfus.
Yes.
Trustee Taglia.
Yes.
Trustee Case.
Yes.
Trustee Bullwinkle.
Yes.
Trustee Davis.
Yes.
President Colleton.
Yes, and with that, we will adjourn into executive session. We will come out of executive session. We will not have any, there will be no formal action taken, so everybody have a great week. Next week will be a regular board meeting, and one final thought, this is Manager Page's last meeting. I want to say, I think he's done an absolutely tremendous job. I could see why the town of Geneva kept him there for 200 years. Was that? No, I'm kidding. They kept him there for about 20 plus years. That's when you think about municipal elections, that's surviving probably 4 or 5 mayors. City council elections every 2 years. That's surviving a lot of people. And if you see, Geneva has made remarkable strides in. His time here was short, but he definitely had a very, very positive impact. All the department heads, from the feedback I've talked, all enjoyed working with him. He was very professional and everything, and threw himself in, and boy, he worked his tail off, man. I'll tell you what. But I want to thank him very much for being here, and I think we probably burn him out so he won't do an interim job until next year. He may have an opportunity this year, but I imagine next year it'll be the new one. And then finally, just to let you all know, you've probably all read the paper, but the new manager will be reporting for duty April 18th. 18th. And in the meantime, we're becoming more and more like Vetus Park, but Vetus will be sitting in this chair for a couple weeks while we transition out of Phil's final days. And then wait for the new manager to show up April 18th. So a lot of things going on, but definitely a lot of positives, a lot of great teamwork by all the department heads. And I want to thank all of you again. Great work on the budget. And Phil, hey man, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've certainly enjoyed it. I think you have a great group of dedicated and professional department heads. I really enjoyed working with them. Enjoyed working with all of you. Some challenging issues we've faced certainly over the past 5 months. Seems like a lot longer than that, but, but it has been good. It has been good, and thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to serve.
Thank you. And with that, we will go into executive session.